Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today on this article I found called How to Get Her to Start Flirting with You. Say these lines to women.
Oh, wow.
It's basically, as you can probably tell, a guide for men on how to, successfully flirt with women.
Right.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm always a little skeptical of these like guaranteed success when it comes to,
Oh, yeah.
anything.
Absolutely.
But especially like dating and social dynamics and things.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about this whole idea, like, is flirting something you can really learn from it?
It's a fascinating question because,
Guidebook.
I mean, on the one hand,
Yeah.
there are definitely certain communication skills and like social cues and things like that that can be learned and practiced.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think this guide might make it sound a lot simpler than it actually is in reality.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, if I'm reading this, I'm like,
Ugh.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's so many different factors that come into play,
Right.
Like individual personalities.
Oh,
and,
sure.
social contexts,
Yeah.
cultural norms, and like,
Right.
all those unspoken things we...
Totally. Yeah, and like every situation is so different.
Except
I can't
so
just have
fragmented.
like a
Yeah.
one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah,
Right.
what works in one setting with one person might totally not work
Totally.
with another person in another setting.
Exactly.
It's very much about reading the room, understanding the dynamic
Right.
between you and the other person.
Uh-huh.
And,
And like you were saying, all those like unspoken signals that...
Exactly. Yeah, all those subtle things that we communicate to each other without even realizing it.
Totally.
Sometimes.
Yeah, so this guy dives right into some specific tactics.
Okay.
And one of the first things they talk about is using what they call
Okay.
semi-sexual compliments.
Interesting.
And I was like, what is a semi-sexual compliment?
Right.
And basically it's like
Thought exchange.
compliments that are a little more suggestive than just like,
Okay.
you look nice.
Right.
So they give examples like saying
Ah.
things like, well, that dress was made for you, instead of like a generic, you look nice today.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like, is there a difference?
I mean, there's definitely a difference in terms of the intention behind the compliment.
Right.
And also the potential impact it can have,
Yeah.
Like a semi-sexual compliment, as they call it,
Right.
is designed to kind of create this sense of intrigue
Uh-huh.
and maybe even a little bit of tension.
Okay.
It's a way of implying attraction
Right.
without being like overtly forward.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and this is really important, it relies on the other person also picking up on that subtle message
Absolutely.
and responding in kind.
Yeah.
So if the recipient isn't on the same page,
Yeah.
what was intended as like a playful compliment could easily be interpreted as
Yeah.
creepy or inappropriate.
Totally. So
Yeah.
how do you know if it's creepy or not? Like,
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no,
how do you walk that line?
like a combination of things.
Okay.
It's like reading social cues, understanding the dynamic between you and the other person,
Right.
being sensitive to the context.
Okay.
Like, imagine someone saying, wow, that dress was made for you,
Yeah.
to a stranger on a crowded bus, versus saying that to someone
Totally different.
you've been chatting with at a party.
Right. Completely different.
It's all about the context.
So context is
Right.
everything.
It's-
Okay, so context
Yeah.
is super important. What about the delivery?
Oh, the delivery is crucial.
Does that play a role?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like, even if you have what you think is like the perfect line,
Yeah.
if it's delivered in a way that feels like rehearsed or forced or insincere,
Yeah.
it's going to fall flat.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really about authenticity.
Okay.
And that's not something a guidebook can teach you.
Right. So even if you have the perfect line, but you don't deliver it right,
Yeah.
it's going to flop.
It's going to flop. Yeah.
Okay, so this guide also talks about
Okay.
using flirty questions
Okay.
to spark conversation
Right.
and build a playful vibe.
Mhm.
And they suggest asking things like, what do you find most attractive in a guy?
Wow. Okay.
Or what's the craziest thing you've ever done on a date?
All right. So we're getting pretty bold here.
Yeah, those are pretty bold questions to ask someone you're just getting to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on
Yeah.
the dynamic that's already been established.
Right.
Like, if there's already a sense of mutual interest and
Right.
a willingness to be a little vulnerable,
Right.
those questions can be a fun way to get to know each other
Sure.
on a deeper level.
Right.
But if they're asked too early, or if they feel like an interrogation,
It can be a major turnoff.
yeah. It seems like the takeaway here is there's no one-size-fits-all approach to
Absolutely.
flirting.
Yeah.
What works in one situation might totally bomb in another.
Yep.
It's all about reading the room
Highway.
and being sensitive to the other person's cues.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that flirting should be enjoyable for both people involved.
Yeah.
You know, it's about creating a playful, lighthearted connection.
Yeah.
Not about manipulating someone
Right.
into liking you.
Totally. Yeah. And speaking of playful,
Okay.
this next tactic from the guide is called playful misinterpretation.
Interesting.
And basically, it's like taking something a woman says and twisting it into a flirty innuendo.
Okay.
They even give this example.
Okay.
Like turning, "That's a terrible shirt you're wearing,"
Oh, boy.
into, "Wow, we've just met and you're already trying to get me out of my clothes."
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I mean, that's a risky move.
Yeah. And to be honest, not one I would recommend.
Really?
Yeah, I think humor can be a great way to break the ice and build rapport.
Sure.
But this particular example relies so heavily on the assumption that the other person will find it funny
Right.
and will appreciate the attempt at flirtation.
Right.
If they don't,
Yeah.
it can come across as really awkward or insensitive or even offensive.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, so even though they're framing it as like playful,
Right.
it could easily backfire.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
especially if it's not done with a keen awareness
Yeah.
of the other person's boundaries.
Right.
And like a genuine understanding of their sense of humor.
Totally.
You know,
Yeah.
humor is so subjective that
Right.
one person finds funny, another person might find really disrespectful or demeaning.
Exactly. So it seems like you're saying
Yeah,
reading social cues is crucial
it's essential.
when it comes to flirting.
Yeah.
It's not just about
You have to be so attuned to the other person's cues, both verbal and nonverbal.
Yeah.
And you also have to be aware of your own intentions and
Right.
how your actions might be perceived.
right.
Right. Yeah.
It's not just about what you're thinking.
Yeah.
It's about how it's coming across.
Exactly. Yeah. Like flirting should be a fun, enjoyable experience
Yeah.
for everyone involved.
Sure.
And that requires mutual respect
Totally.
and a willingness to be sensitive to each other's boundaries.
This guide also talks about the idea of escalation.
Okay.
So like moving from light flirting to more intimate interactions. They suggest things like using touch or giving more personal compliments. But they seem to imply that any hesitation from a woman is just like a challenge to overcome.
Interesting.
What do you think about that? Is there a danger in that mindset?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Like consent is paramount in any interaction.
Right.
And respecting someone's boundaries is non-negotiable. So this idea of pushing through resistance or seeing hesitation as a challenge
Right.
sends a really dangerous message.
Okay.
It suggests that someone's no doesn't really mean no,
Right.
which can be incredibly harmful and disrespectful.
So it's not always about being persistent.
Right.
Sometimes it's about knowing when to back off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, if someone is hesitant or pulling back,
Right.
it's crucial to respect that and adjust your approach accordingly.
Totally.
You know, it might be that they need more time to warm up, or they might not be interested in taking things further.
Sure.
Either way, it's important to prioritize their comfort
Yeah.
and respect their decision.
It seems like with this guide, while it does offer some potential conversation starters,
Yeah,
it presents a very one-sided
I think so.
and potentially problematic view
Yeah.
of flirting.
I think that's a great point.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's important to remember that this guide, like many others out there, is based on a particular set of assumptions about gender roles and the dynamics of attraction. And it kind of perpetuates this idea
Right.
that men are the pursuers
Yeah.
and women are the gatekeepers,
Right.
which can be a very limiting and ultimately an unhelpful framework.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to move beyond these rigid roles
Absolutely.
and scripts
Yeah,
if we want to have more authentic and fulfilling connections.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
When we challenge those outdated norms
Right.
and approach flirting with a more egalitarian and open-minded perspective,
Right.
we create space for more genuine and meaningful interactions.
This has been so eye-opening already. It's amazing how, like, digging into something as seemingly simple as flirting advice
I know, it's fascinating.
can reveal so much about societal norms
Yeah.
and expectations around
Sure.
dating and relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've got a lot more to unpack in this guide.
We do.
We're going to dive into some of the other tactics and explore their potential benefits and pitfalls.
Sounds good.
But before we do that, we'll be back right after this.
All right.
So stay tuned.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about this whole idea of consent and respecting boundaries.
Yeah, such an important topic.
Yeah, it seems like this guide kind of glosses over that a bit in its pursuit of getting women to flirt.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy definitely spends a lot of time on tactics for, like, building momentum
Right.
and keeping the conversation flowing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always acknowledge the importance of the other person's feelings and responses.
Right, like their agency in the situation.
Exactly.
Like it's not just about what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. It's a two-way street.
It's a two-way street for sure. So they talk about things like teasing and using callbacks to earlier parts of the conversation.
Yeah.
And while those can be fun and engaging,
Yeah, for sure.
I can also see how they could easily become disrespectful.
Oh, absolutely. If you're not paying attention to how the other person is reacting.
Totally. Like I've definitely been on the receiving end of teasing.
Oh, yeah.
That felt more like bullying than flirting.
Totally. It's a very fine line.
That's such a fine line.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how can you tell if you're crossing that line?
That's a great question. I think it really comes down to emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Being attuned to the other person's verbal and nonverbal cues.
Yeah, I remember they laughing along.
Right? Are they engaged?
Are they like leaning in? Are they pulling away?
Exactly. Are they making eye contact? Are they smiling? Or are their smiles kind of forced?
Right.
Are they looking uncomfortable? Are they trying to create physical distance?
Right.
Paying attention to all those subtle signals
Yeah.
can really help you gauge whether your flirting is being well received or if it's making the other person uncomfortable.
So it's not just about saying the right things, it's about being aware.
Yeah, it's about the impact
Of the impact.
that your words and actions are having. Exactly. And being willing to adjust based on that.
Totally. If you sense that someone is uncomfortable with your teasing,
Yeah.
even if it's intended to be lighthearted,
Right.
it's important to back off and shift gears.
Yeah, absolutely. So this guide also talks about using physical touch
Okay.
as a way to escalate the interaction, suggesting things like a light touch on the arm or shoulder.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really go into the complexities of consent
Right.
when it comes to physical contact. Do you think that's an important element that's missing here?
Absolutely. I mean, physical touch can be a powerful way
Yeah.
to communicate attraction and build connection, but it's essential to approach it with extreme sensitivity and respect.
Especially given the increased awareness around consent these days.
Right.
It seems almost irresponsible for a guide like this to just casually suggest touching someone without really emphasizing that importance.
Yeah, like they mentioned respecting boundaries.
But they don't really delve into what that actually means in practice.
Right. Like how do you actually...
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that everyone has different comfort levels.
Right.
When it comes to physical contact.
Yeah.
There's no universal rule, so it's always best to err on the side of caution
Right.
and be very attuned to the other person's body language and verbal cues.
So it sounds like you're saying it's better to ask permission
Absolutely.
than to assume it's okay.
Yeah, and it's not just about asking for explicit permission for every touch.
Okay.
It's also about paying attention to nonverbal cues.
Okay.
Is the other person leaning in or pulling away?
Right.
Are they making eye contact and smiling, or are they looking uncomfortable?
Right.
These subtle signals can tell you a lot.
Yeah, so the guide also talks about staying confident in the face of hesitation.
Okay.
But isn't there a difference between healthy confidence
Oh, huge difference.
and just being pushy?
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Healthy confidence is about believing in yourself and your worth.
Right.
But it's also about respecting other people's boundaries and choices. Being pushy is about disregarding those boundaries and trying to force your will on someone else.
It seems like this guide might blur those lines a bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Like encouraging men to see any hesitation as a challenge to be overcome.
Yeah.
Rather than a sign that maybe they need to adjust their approach.
I agree. It presents a very one-dimensional view of flirting.
Yeah.
Where persistence is always the answer.
Right.
But in reality, there are times when persistence is appropriate and times when it's absolutely not.
Totally.
It all comes down to reading the situation,
Yeah.
understanding the other person's signals, and respecting their choices.
Yeah, that can be tricky.
It can be really tricky.
Sometimes it's hard to tell if someone is genuinely interested
Yeah.
or just being polite.
Right.
What advice would you give to someone who's trying to navigate?
That's a great question. I think the key is to look for clusters of cues
Okay.
rather than focusing on any single gesture or word.
Right.
For example, if someone is making eye contact, smiling, leaning in, asking you questions.
Right.
That's a pretty good indication that they're enjoying the interaction and are open to continuing the conversation.
Okay.
On the other hand, if they're looking away, avoiding eye contact, crossing their arms, giving short one-word answers, it might be a sign that they're not interested.
Yeah.
Or that they're feeling uncomfortable.
So it's about looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, the overall vibe.
Yeah, the overall vibe and being sensitive to that.
Exactly. And it's also about being willing to accept
Yes.
that not everyone is going to be interested in you. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Rejection is a part of life.
For sure.
Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
Right.
It just means that you and that particular person weren't a match at that particular moment in time.
Totally.
Yeah.
This guide also spends some time on this idea of creating chemistry.
Okay.
But isn't genuine chemistry something that's more organic? Can you really create it?
That's the question.
By following a set of steps.
Yeah, like that's the age-old question, right?
Yeah.
Like while you can certainly do things to make yourself more approachable and engaging, true chemistry is something that's sparked between two people. Yeah. Based on this complex interplay of factors.
Totally.
Like shared values, interests, senses of humor, and that intangible, something that we call spark.
Right. So you're saying that while you can learn skills to be a better communicator and put yourself out there, you can't really force chemistry to happen.
Exactly. You can create a favorable environment for chemistry to develop, but you can't manufacture it. It's either there or it's not.
Totally.
And if it's not there, it's best to move on and find someone who you do connect with on that deeper level.
It seems like this guide is very focused on the external aspects of flirting, like what to say and how to act.
Yeah.
But it's missing that deeper level of connection.
Totally.
That's so essential for building a lasting relationship.
I think that's a great point, you know?
Yeah.
It's almost as if it's treating flirting as a game to be won with a set of rules and strategies to follow.
Right.
But in reality, flirting is more about expressing genuine interest and seeing if that interest is reciprocated.
Totally.
It's about being open and vulnerable and allowing yourself to be seen for who you truly are.
The guide also mentions this idea of being the prize.
Okay.
And presenting yourself as someone who is desirable and sought after.
Right.
Do you think that's a helpful mindset?
It's interesting, I think.
When it comes to flirting?
It's important to have confidence in yourself and your worth.
Right.
But framing it as being the prize can sometimes create this sense of competition and scarcity that isn't really conducive to building healthy relationships.
It seems like that kind of mindset could lead to people focusing more on winning someone over than on actually getting to know them as a person.
Yeah, it's more about like external validation than genuine connection.
So it's about shifting the focus from external validation to internal worth.
Exactly. When you believe in yourself and your own value, you don't need to play games or manipulate others into liking you.
You can just be yourself.
You can just be yourself and allow connections to form organically.
So we've been talking a lot about the potential pitfalls of this guide's advice.
Right.
But are there any aspects of it?
That's a good question.
That you think are actually helpful or valuable?
You know, I think there are some nuggets of wisdom in there.
Okay.
Particularly around the importance of being a good listener, being genuine, and being respectful. Yeah. Even though the guide might frame these qualities in a way that's focused on getting a specific outcome. Yeah. They are nonetheless important elements of healthy communication and relationship building.
So even though we might not agree with the guide's overall approach, there are still some useful takeaways.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the key is to approach any advice, whether it's about flirting or any other aspect of life, with a critical eye and a willingness to filter out what resonates with you and discard what doesn't.
That's a great point. It's about taking what's helpful and leaving the rest behind.
Exactly.
So we've covered so much ground today.
We have.
From analyzing specific flirting techniques to exploring the complexities of consent, respect, and genuine connection.
Right.
What do you think are the most important takeaways?
That's a great question, I think.
For our listeners.
The biggest takeaway is that there's no magic formula. For flirting or finding love,
right,
it's about being yourself, being respectful, and being open to the possibility of connecting with others on a deeper level.
And it's about remembering that everyone is an individual with
Yeah.
their own unique set of experiences, values, and boundaries.
Totally.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
It's about embracing the diversity of human experience and approaching each interaction with curiosity
Yes.
and a willingness to learn and grow.
I love that.
This has been such an insightful and thought-provoking conversation.
It has been fun.
Thank you so much for joining us
Of course.
on this deep dive into the world of flirting and dating advice.
Yeah.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration and that you've gained some valuable insights along the way.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up our analysis of this guide,
Okay.
there's one more aspect I wanted to explore.
All right. I'm intrigued.
The guide talks about handling rejection gracefully,
Okay.
but it seems to frame it as something that's almost always temporary.
Interesting.
Like you just need to keep trying until you wear the other person down.
Oh.
What do you think about that approach?
I think that approach can be incredibly harmful and disrespectful.
Yeah.
While it's important to maintain your confidence and
Right.
composure if someone isn't interested,
Yeah.
it's crucial to distinguish between genuine disinterest
Okay.
and simple shyness or nervousness.
Right.
You know, there's a big difference between someone being hesitant because they're shy
Right.
and someone being clear that they don't want to engage with you.
And the guide doesn't really
Yeah.
make that distinction.
Right. It kind of encourages people
Yeah.
to ignore those signs of disinterest and just keep pushing forward,
Yeah.
even when it's clear that the other person isn't receptive.
Which can be so
And that can be so off-putting
off-putting. Yeah.
and even scary
Yeah.
for the person on the receiving end of that unwanted attention.
Exactly. And it's important to remember
Right.
that no one owes you their time or attention.
Absolutely.
And respecting someone's decision to disengage
Yeah.
is crucial.
It's so important.
So even though the guide talks about handling rejection gracefully, it seems like it's also suggesting that you shouldn't necessarily accept it
Yeah, don't take no for an answer.
as final.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a dangerous message to send.
Yeah, I agree.
It's important to remember that rejection is a part of life,
Mm,
and it's not a reflection of your worth as a person.
right,
It's often more about compatibility timing
right.
and circumstances than anything else.
Yeah, this has been so eye-opening.
It's been a great conversation.
I've gone way beyond just analyzing the specific tactics
Totally.
in this guide.
Yeah.
And we've really started to unpack the bigger picture
Right.
of flirting, consent, and respect.
Yeah. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
There's so much more to explore when it comes to these topics. But before we dive even deeper,
Yes.
let's take a quick break to gather our thoughts.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we're back. And I'm still thinking about, what you said before the break about chemistry.
Oh, yeah.
Not being something you can force. And it seems like this guide kind of makes it sound like if you just say the right things
Yeah,
and use the right techniques, you can create that spark with anyone.
right.
What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that's a really common misconception about chemistry.
Yeah.
While you can certainly improve your communication skills
Yep.
and become more confident in social situations,
Yeah.
genuine chemistry is something that arises organically
Okay.
from a combination of factors
Yeah.
that go beyond just words and actions.
So it's not just about saying the right pickup lines
Right,
or
exactly.
mastering a certain technique.
It's about finding someone who you connect with on multiple levels,
Okay.
intellectually, emotionally, and even physically.
It's about shared values, a sense of humor,
Right,
and that inexplicable feeling of being drawn to someone.
right. So it seems like this guide is very focused on those external aspects
Mm-hmm.
of flirting, like what to say, how to act.
Yeah, the mechanics of it.
The mechanics of it, yeah.
Right.
But it kind of misses that deeper level
Like stuff,
of
right,
connection that's so essential
Right.
for building a lasting relationship.
I think that's a really great point.
Yeah.
It's almost as if it's treating flirting as a game to be won,
Yeah.
with a set of rules and strategies to follow.
Yeah.
But in reality, flirting is more about expressing genuine interest
Okay.
and seeing if that interest is reciprocated.
Yeah.
It's about being open and vulnerable
Right.
and allowing yourself to be seen for who you truly are.
Yeah. The guide also talks about this idea of being the prize
Oh, yeah.
and presenting yourself as someone who is desirable and sought after.
Right.
Do you think that's a helpful mindset when it comes to flirting?
I think it's important to have confidence in yourself and your worth,
Right.
but framing it as being the prize
Okay.
can create this sense of competition and scarcity
Uh-huh.
that isn't really conducive to building healthy relationships.
Right, so it becomes more about winning than connecting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about shifting the focus from external validation
Okay.
to internal worth.
Okay.
When you believe in yourself and your own value,
Right.
you don't need to play games or manipulate others
Right.
into liking you.
You can just be yourself.
You can just be yourself.
Right, and let things happen organically.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked a lot about like the potential pitfalls
Right.
of this guide's advice.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, are there any aspects of it that you think are actually helpful?
Yeah, I think there are some nuggets of wisdom in there,
Okay.
particularly around the importance of being a good listener,
Okay.
being genuine and being respectful.
Right.
Even though the guide might frame these qualities in a way that's focused on getting a specific outcome,
Right.
they are nonetheless important elements of healthy communication
Right.
and relationship building.
So even though we might not agree with the guide's overall approach,
Yeah,
there are still some useful takeaways.
absolutely. I think the key is to approach any advice,
Right.
whether it's about flirting or any other aspect of life,
Yeah.
with a critical eye
Okay.
and a willingness to filter out what resonates with you
Right.
and discard what doesn't.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
It's about taking what's helpful and leaving the rest behind.
exactly.
We've covered so much ground today,
Yeah, we have.
from analyzing specific flirting techniques to like exploring the complexities of consent, respect, and genuine connection.
It's been quite a journey.
It has been a journey.
Yeah.
What do you think are the most important takeaways for our listeners?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway is that there's no magic formula
Right.
for flirting or for finding love. It's about being yourself, being respectful, and being open to the possibility of connecting with others on a deeper level.
And it's about remembering that everyone is an individual
Absolutely.
with their own unique set of experience,
Mhm.
values, and boundaries.
Totally.
And what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
Yeah, but it's about embracing that diversity
Mm.
of human experience
Yeah.
and approaching each interaction with curiosity and a willingness to learn and grow.
I love that.
This has been such an insightful and thought-provoking conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of flirting and dating advice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration
Mhm.
and that you've gained some valuable insights along the way.
Absolutely.
Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other,
Yes.
and happy flirting.
Have fun out there.